So, you're here because you want to embark on your Osu mapping journey. Sick. Let's open up the editor and what is this? There's buttons on all sides of the screen, deep contextual menus, 2 buttons labeled timing, 2 buttons labeled timing, what the f***?
See you next time.
The editor can be quite complex and hard to understand at first glance. There's so much information staring at you all at the same time, things all over the place, and that's when you look at it on a big screen. It's easy to forget that Osu Lazer is available on mobile too. But don't worry, after watching this video, you'll have a complete, and I really mean complete, understanding of the Lazer editor in full. And you'll have the mechanics you'll need to create your very first map. I'll also teach you how to time your songs, so you're not just limited to the featured artist listing. Try following along while watching this video, and you'll be familiar with the editor in no time at all. So let's get started! Actually, before we begin, I want to put out a little bit of a disclaimer. The Lazer editor is still in development, and, like I mentioned in my previous video, go watch it if you haven't seen it already, new features can and probably will be added. You'll hear about them first on the official Osu YouTube channel, which posts monthly videos about updates to the game, including the editor. But I'll also try to keep this video's description updated with any major changes or additions as well. There's also timestamps in the description too, so you can skip ahead if you're looking for something specific. Alright, now that's all out the way, let's start by talking about how we get our song into the game. When we first open up the editor, we get greeted by the song setup. This part is mostly self-explanatory, so we don't need to spend too much time here. Select your MP3 or .ogg file by clicking here, or just drag it into the editor, and fill in the required fields if they're not filled in already. The romanized artist and title fields are used when translating Unicode into ASCII, for example romanizing Japanese characters. Don't forget to pick a background image and apply combo colors too. Next, set up your difficulty settings here. You should already know what most of them do if you just play the game. A couple you might be unfamiliar with, however, include the base velocity, which acts as a multiplier for slider velocity, and distance snap, but we'll go over those later. Tick rate is how many ticks are in a beat long slider, and stack leniency, which decides if your circles stack like this, or like this. If you have a video to go along with your song, you can add it here as well, but there are rules regarding the quality of background videos, file sizes, and more, so check the ranking criteria for more details before uploading. Underneath here is all about Hitsounds. Hitsounding has had a huge overhaul, and it starts with this grid of plus signs. Clicking on one of these icons opens up a menu for you to select a sample that will play whenever the edition is selected. Click on Add New in the Custom Sample Sets dropdown, and you can create additional sample banks to choose from. We'll go into more detail about what all these mean later on in this video, but for now, you can either leave this empty or add them later. Finally, there's the design toggles. You can hover over these question marks to find out what they do, but most of the time, you're not going to need to touch them. Easy! Now that we've got our map's audio, background, and settings dialed in, let's move into the Timing tab in the top right of the window. Timing is one of the biggest friction points in mapping for new mappers. The interface is fairly intimidating, and it's not immediately obvious what you're supposed to do. So let's break it down into different sections, and you'll be able to time your first map in no time at all. First, let's look at the waveform at the top. This is our song in a visual format. We need to find the BPM, or beats per minute, of our song. Basically how fast it is. The easiest way to do that is to simply bop your head to the music. You don't really have to think about it, your body will just do it. That's the beat. You might find that this should line up with the visual peaks in the waveform. It's really noticeable if your song has a clear drum track. Now drag the timeline at the top to the first identifiable beat in the song and click Add at Current Time. Next, instead of bopping your head to the beat, tap your T key instead. This is how you'll find the BPM mentioned earlier. The longer you keep tapping, the more accurate it'll be. After you're done, give it a listen and see how it sounds. If you find that the BPM you've landed on doesn't sync quite right, click these buttons to adjust it until it's locked in over the whole song. You can also directly type in a BPM value in case you already know it for your song. Now let's listen to what we've got once more. Notice how the metronome sounds slightly but consistently offbeat? That's because our offset isn't quite right. Using the buttons over here, line up the tick of the metronome with the beat. You can check you've got this correct by looking at the green waveform on the right. This is a more compact view of the waveform at the top and visualizes the song on a beat-by-beat basis. Move your mouse over this window to see different sections of the song. Clicking it locks the view. If you've got it right, the white line should match up with the peaks in the waveform we mentioned earlier. You did it! You timed your very first song. Usually, this will be the only timing point you need, but some songs can require more. In those cases, you'll need multiple of these timing points, but this is a long process that requires some experience to accurately pull off, so I recommend sticking to single BPM songs for now. If you're still struggling, don't forget that Osu's featured artist listing has a large library of songs and they all come with pre-timed .osc files, so you can try one of those instead. Or you can just copy somebody else's timing. It's totally fine. Alright, now comes the main course, the Compose tab. This is where you're going to be spending almost all of your time. So before we lock in, hit the like button if you've enjoyed it or found it useful so far. It really helps me out and shows me you're just as excited for the rest of this series as I am. Speaking of which, we're going to be diving into the theory behind mapping in the next episodes, so get subscribed so you don't miss those. Let's split this window into two sections, the timelines for song navigation and the playfield for actual note placement. We're going to dive into the timelines first. Think of the bottom timeline as a macro view of your entire map. You'll use this to quickly access any section of your map, as well as view key details. In the bottom left, you'll see the current time, completion percentage, and the BPM. If you're getting feedback from your friends in Discord and they send you a timestamp, paste it here and the editor will automatically jump to it. Over in the bottom right, you'll see a giant test button that lets you test your map, alongside your playback speed options. These are particularly useful if you're struggling to understand the song's rhythm and how you want to interpret it. Now for the actual timeline. You'll find your position in the song, timing points, bookmarks, the preview point, key times, and breaks. Breaks work a little differently in Lazer compared to Stable, in that they can only be created automatically when there's a big enough gap between objects. The bookmarks are markers you can place to split up the map into multiple sections or to remind you of something. Press Ctrl B anywhere to place one. The preview point is what plays in the song select menu and on the website. You can set one by clicking here and then here. Next up is key time. That's the thin purple bar, and it triggers the cool visual effects you see when playing in the most intense parts of a song. Add them by going into the timing tab and clicking the Add at Current Time button, then selecting key time under the effect box. Pretty simple, right? Now let's talk about what the top timeline does, or what I'm going to call the object timeline from this point onwards. Excluding the playfield, this timeline is what your eyes will be drawn to the most, so let's check it out. In addition to the waveform we saw when timing our map, you'll also find your circles, sliders, and spinners. Dragging them moves them to the next tick in the timeline. More on what those are later. There's also these pink and green bubbles. They control your slider velocity and hit sounds, but again, we'll talk about those in a little bit. Located to the right are the controls for zooming in and out, although it's much quicker to hover over the timeline and hold Alt while scrolling instead. Navigating the object timeline works the opposite to how navigating the bottom timeline works. Over there, you move around the song, but here, the song and your objects move around you. Scrolling or pressing the arrow keys moves you to the next tick. Speaking of which, it's time to talk about the beat snap divisor. This setting is critical, as it controls which ticks are visible for you to scroll and snap objects to. The most common patterns you've probably encountered while playing, like jumps or streams, are usually placed on the white, red, and blue ticks respectively, so you'll be sticking to those the majority of the time, but not always. On the super rare occasion you'll need something more complex than what's available, you can type the snap you want by clicking here. To make life easier, It's a good idea to have your beat snap divisor set to the divisor above the one you want to snap your objects to, since you will have finer control when placing sliders later on. Now that we've learned how to effectively navigate around our song, let's put some objects down in the place where the magic happens. The sidebar on the left contains the majority of the buttons you need to place and hit sound the objects in your map, and it's split into 3 sections. The top section of the sidebar is called the toolbox, and it contains the tools we need to select and place objects, as well as an additional tool we'll get to see later. Let's place a circle first. Select the tool, scroll to the beat of the song you want to place your circle on, and left click. Done! If you're not happy with it, you can delete it in both the playfield and the object timeline by middle clicking. There's also all these other options to delete notes, but honestly, if you're not transitioning away from stable, getting used to middle click is probably your best bet. However, when it comes to placing sliders and spinners, there's a little more to it than just left and middle clicking. Creating a basic slider starts just like a circle. Select it in the toolbox and click the playfield. Moving your mouse now determines the slider's path as well as its duration in the timeline. Right click to lock in the endpoint. That's going to create the most basic form of sliders, a perfectly straight line. You can change its direction and length by dragging any of its control points, or move the entire slider by dragging the body. You can, in theory, make entire maps using only straight sliders, but to unlock their full potential, we need to do a little more work. To start with, Control-click anywhere on the slider body, or bring up the context menu by right-clicking to create an additional control point. These control points, also commonly known as nodes or anchors, influence the path of the slider. By right-clicking the slider head, we can change how the slider reacts to your anchors by selecting one of 4 modes. You already know the first mode, it just connects all control points linearly. This next mode, however, Bezier, is where it gets a bit more interesting. This mode smooths out the slider path and makes things curvy. Figuring out how this works might feel weird initially, but with time, you'll be capable of making insanely complex and pretty slider shapes. Our third mode helps out a lot with this. It creates a perfect circle that passes through 3 anchors. If you add more than 3, the next anchor will change the mode back to Bezier, since a circle is only defined by 3 points. Lastly, B-spline is very similar to the Bezier mode, but gives you more control over the slider's path rather than the shape. Random fact, by the way, this is the same method that Photoshop uses to create paths. Each of these modes are powerful in their own right, but you can bring your slider design to the next level when you combine these different modes together. Right-click any of the anchors we just placed, and instead of just inheriting the previous mode, we're able to assign a new mode to them, which then applies until it's changed again on a different anchor. Each mode change here will always be a hard corner, similar to the linear mode, so keep that in mind when creating fluent transitions between modes. Speaking of fluency, now try left-clicking during the slider's creation to directly add additional control points to make your curves and shapes quicker. The editor defaults to different modes when adding new control points this way. When adding a single additional anchor, it will automatically switch to the perfect curve mode. Points after this will switch to Bezier. Double-clicking instead adds a control point that acts like a reset, so it starts out linear. Add another control point, and it becomes circular again, and Bezier after that. Slider design is basically a skill in itself, with a really high skill ceiling. Understanding how these modes interact and learning how to combine each of them is how you're going to take your sliders from this to this. Sweet, you've made a beautiful slider. Now that's done, you might have spotted this green bubble up here. That's the slider velocity, or SV for short. It controls how fast a slider moves relative to the base velocity we defined in the Setup tab. Getting the hang of SV manipulation is critical in helping you make maps going forwards. So let's go over the different ways of implementing them now. You'll be using a combination of them in the long run. First, we're going to start off simple by clicking the green bubble and either typing or dragging the slider to the multiplier we want. Easy! Next up is the yellow curve you'll find at the end of every slider. Dragging this changes the slider's duration, but keeps the velocity you set. Holding shift while dragging this changes the velocity and keeps the duration. You can also hold shift while dragging on the end of the slider in the timeline. Stop holding shift if you want to add repeats to your slider instead. An alternative way to change the slider velocity can be found in the right sidebar. When selecting one or multiple sliders, you set the SV changes for all of them at the same time. Now, by default, newly placed sliders inherit their velocities from the previous SV, but changing the value in this menu while not having any objects selected will make it act as an override, meaning each new slider will follow that value instead. To reset this back to using the previous SV, just click the button. That's a huge amount of information to take in at once. But remember what I said earlier. Start with simple shapes and small slider velocity changes. You can always go back and change your sliders if you aren't happy with them. Spinners are thankfully much simpler and less painful to explain. Just left click to start it, and right click once you've scrolled to where you want it to end in the timeline to finish it. There's also the grid button here, but we'll cover that in a little bit. But before we do that, it's important to know that if you ever make a mistake, Ctrl-Z and Ctrl-Y are how you undo and redo actions. The other default shortcuts for cut, copy, and paste are all supported too. I almost forgot to mention the most important shortcut, and that's Ctrl-S. It saves your map. Press it regularly, and you will thank me later. It's one of those mistakes you'll make once, and then never again.
Did I just delete my map? Oh no.
Alright, let's talk about object manipulation. The editor provides a whole arsenal of options available at your disposal. You might have noticed this big yellow box that appears when you select a slider or multiple objects. If you've used Photoshop in the past, these points kinda work similar to how they do over there. You can move, scale, and rotate your selection with slightly different behaviors when holding Shift or Alt. Just give them a try and see what happens. These 5 buttons allow you to flip, reverse, and rotate your selection by 90 degrees. It's good to build muscle memory for these quick actions since you'll be using them constantly, so try to use the keybinds you see here to save you time and also better understand any feedback you'll get in the future. This button in particular needs a little further explanation as its behavior changes depending on what and how many objects you have selected. Have just a slider selected? It swaps the head and tail. If you've got multiple objects selected, it not only switches any slider's direction you have in the selection, it also reverses the whole selection's rhythm. If you want finer control, press Ctrl-E or Ctrl-R to scale and rotate using these menus in the right sidebar. In this same section, there's also the option to move selections on an individual axis, but honestly that is rarely needed since using Ctrl and the arrow keys achieves the same thing. Another cool feature that is new to Lazer is slider splitting. Try right-clicking on any control point that isn't in inherit mode and select Split Control Point to chop the slider into separate objects at that point. Okay, we've split our sliders, but did you know you can merge multiple objects together as well? To do that, press Ctrl-Shift-M or select the option from the right-click menu, and your entire selection will merge into a single slider.
No, I got it wrong!
Any distance around circles will create a linear section in between, but if there are 2 sliders next to each other, the second slider will be moved to the first slider's tail instead. Another thing you'll find in the right-click menu specifically for sliders is the ability to convert it to a stream. You can also press Ctrl-Shift-F to achieve the same thing. As of right now, you don't have the same level of control as you do in the stable editor when converting sliders to streams, which is something I'd like to see changed in the future. You can still somewhat control your stream's properties in a more simplified manner by using the SV to control the spacing, and the beat snap divisor for the object count. Now that we know how to manipulate our objects, it's time to talk toggles. Back on the left sidebar under the object selection tools are the toggles for new combos, hit sound additions, grid snap, and distance snap. These 4 toggles apply to all selected objects, or the next object you'll place in case you don't have any selected. It's not mission critical to know how to implement new combos or hit sound additions effectively just yet. For now, just go with the flow. New combos work in the way you'd expect. They reset the number in your object back to 1 and change the color. To toggle new combos quickly while placing an object, right-click before placing it. You'll see it change in the object timeline, but make sure you don't accidentally hover over other objects while doing so. They'll get deleted. When selecting a new comboed object, you can also change the color it's assigned by clicking this little button over here. This can be useful if you want to have some colors exclusive to one section, for example. Remember when I said we'd cover the grid button? It's used in conjunction with the grid snap toggle, which forces all objects to be snapped to the grid. You can change the grid by selecting it and clicking anywhere on the playfield. This determines the center point of the grid. Moving the mouse now defines its density, and another left click confirms it. You can alternatively click, drag, and release. It's a little bit faster. Some more precise options are found over here on the right, where you can even change the shape of your grid altogether. And finally, if you right-click with this tool selected, the grid resets itself to default. Next up is Distance Snap, or DS for short. But what does that mean? Distance Snap enforces proportional distance between hit objects. Or in simpler terms, the spacing between the notes gets bigger if the time between them is longer. You can enable this by using the toggle or by temporarily holding Alt. The big rings you can see here display which tick on the timeline the object will end up at. By default, this distance is the same as your latest slider velocity. This means that the speed of the cursor between two objects will be the same as it would be to play a slider in the same time frame. If you want to have a distance snap that is slightly different from your current SV, you can give it its own multiplier over here on the right. Now that's all cleared up, let's talk about hit sounding. Ah yes, hit sounding. Everybody has to know how to do it, but everybody hates actually doing it. It's really not hard knowing how to hit sound, so let's waste no time in getting into it. The bottom part of the sidebar is where you choose the sample bank for the objects you have selected. Remember the hit sounding section and the song setup screen? The hit normal sample we chose there plays on every single circle, based on which bank we have selected. You can also set this to auto during object placement. This means it will copy the normal bank from the previous object. On top of each hit sound, additions can be set to add some extra spice. We already checked those out earlier in the toggle section, and the buttons down here override the sample bank that is being used for these additions specifically. Auto just uses the same bank that is set as the hit normal sample. That's just one way of adding hit sounds to your map. Let's talk about another. Moving back to the object timeline, take a look at these small pink bubbles. The text in them shows the current sample set and the volume. Click on one, and you'll find you can change these settings as well as hear previews of how it sounds with your skin or with custom sample banks. Notice how the pink bubbles aren't just at every object, but also at slider bodies, reverses, and ends. This way, all of these elements can be hit sounded separately from the slider head. It's important to keep in mind that newly placed objects will always inherit the volume and sample bank from the previous object until it's changed again. Also, if you don't plan on touching hit sounds just yet, please, just set everything to soft so people giving feedback on your maps don't have to hear this. If that wasn't enough, you can also change hit sounds on objects when right-clicking them. That's 3 different ways of applying hit sounds. Yay. Knowing where to place each sample is something we're going to cover in a future episode. But for now, here's a great workflow to get used to. Select the note you want to start hit sounding with, press your hit sounding keys, and then press Ctrl, Shift, and right arrow keys to immediately snap to the next pink bubble on the timeline. You'll be surprised at how fast you can speed through a map and apply hit sounds this way. We're not quite done yet. Over here in the right sidebar, we'll start with the Polygon generator. This tool creates a variety of geometric patterns out of circles. Control the amount of circles you want to create using the vertices slider, then control the distance between each circle, and then the starting rotation of the shape you're making. Finally, select how many times you want the shape to repeat and click Create. Make sure to not accidentally click off of this menu before doing that, or you'll have to do it all again. Next up, we've got these freehand slider options. Remember when I taught you how to place a slider? I didn't give you guys the full story. There's a new way to place sliders in Lazer which is going to blow your mind. Select the slider tool, and simply click and drag around the playfield. Give it a try. It's especially useful when sketching out a visual idea, much quicker than you can in Stable. These controls change how the algorithm behaves when you're drawing your slider. Play around with them to achieve the effect you want. It's trial and error, but you'll get a feel for what these settings do pretty quickly, so go and experiment. Finally, at the very top, we have the inspector. This gives you additional details about the currently selected object, such as the object type, the distance to and from the next and previous objects, etc. Honestly, I don't find much of the information here all that useful, especially when creating harder difficulties, and because of its size, it makes it a bit more annoying to access the more useful tools in this sidebar. You can hide this by using this little button up here if you want to. Oh yeah, did I mention you can hide menus already? Pretty neat. That's all for the Compose tab. But before I let you off into the wild, there's a few other things to mention around the editor that are good to know. The Design tab is empty, but it'll have something here related to storyboarding at some point in the future. Soon TM. The Verify tab shows you problems with your map that break the ranking criteria. It's not super important to fix everything here while you're learning, and fixing everything here does not automatically make your map rankable. That's another topic for another day. Still, making sure you don't have any objects going off-screen or two objects playing at the same time is a good idea at the very least. Finally, let's talk about the drop-down menus. We've already checked out what the timing drop-down menu did earlier when talking about bookmarks, so let's skip straight to the view menu, in which you'll toggle some options on how the editor looks. Most of them should be pretty self-explanatory, but these four in particular are worth mentioning. Hit markers lets us see objects after they have already faded out. This helps us with building up our patterns later, so I'd recommend keeping this enabled. The next two options slightly change the behavior of distance snap, and they're exclusive to each other, so you can only have one option enabled at any time. Automatically seeking after placing objects means that if you place an object using distance snap, the timeline will automatically move to that newly placed object. This is particularly useful when creating lower difficulties which often rely on distance snap, since you can just keep clicking to place one object after the other. Limiting distance snap placement to the current time essentially disables the functionality of the big rings we mentioned earlier, and it only lets you place objects on the ones that you are currently at with your timeline cursor. This acts a bit like a legacy mode since it resembles how distance snap worked on stable. Speaking of stable, I've got a couple of tips that you might find helpful to help you make the transition to Lazer a little bit easier. Contract sidebars when not hovered collapses the UI and frees up a lot of space. I find enabling this one especially helpful since I like to have the extra space surrounding the playfield. An additional trick I use to help make the editor feel a little less claustrophobic is to lower the UI scaling in the global settings menu. The edit dropdown gives you access to the most common shortcuts, and is particularly useful if you're mapping on a mobile or tablet, where you don't have access to quick keybinds. Lastly, the file dropdown is where you'll create new difficulties if you're making more diffs for your set, or want to create a guest difficulty on another. The option below quickly lets you switch to other difficulties in the same set. Next, you've got the ability to upload and export your map in a variety of formats, as well as quick access to the beatmap's web pages if it's uploaded. It's also possible to edit your beatmap externally, meaning you will directly expose the raw files used in your map. However, if you don't have a specific reason to be here, it's best left alone, since renaming or deleting any of these difficulties might break your beatmap. That's everything! A complete guide to the Osu Lazer Editor. I don't want to take up too much more of your time as this is a pretty long video already, so thank you so much for watching and I hope you found it useful. Let me know in the comments if you think I've missed something, and also tell me if there's any specific mapping topics you'd like to see covered in the future. I'll be reading them. If you're looking for something else to watch in the meantime, give my Twitch channel a follow. I'm often reviewing maps sent in by chat or making my own. Drop by sometime. Or why not check out episode 0? It's worth a watch.